Good afternoon, everyone. We're the closing act here, but we're really excited to talk about small business government contracting. So I'll start with a bit of background. My name is Shomari Wade. I'm a shareholder in the government contract group of Greenberg, Traurig, based in Washington, D.C. And I'm joined by Lou Huddleston and Enrique. So why don't you talk about yourselves? Maybe Lou will start, and then Enrique, and then we can sort of go into small business federal contracting.
Well, thanks a lot for the opportunity, and appreciate everyone hanging in here on a late Friday afternoon. I'm Lou Huddleston, and I come out of Fayetteville, North Carolina. I'll tell you a little story. When I flew into the airport a couple of days ago here in San Francisco, and I made my way downtown late at night, and I realized this was the first time I'd been back to San Francisco since I was a child. And let me tell you this story. My mother was married to a soldier, and at the age of 30, she dragged 4 kids, ranging from the age of 7 to 2, from North Carolina to San Francisco Bay. And she put us on a troop ship, not a cruise ship, but a troop ship. And we stayed on the Pacific for 14 days and linked up with my father in Japan for occupation duty in 1956. And we moved by train then to Camp Chickamauga, which was really an unimproved camp. And that's where my mother spent the next 2 years with her kids and my father with the 187th Combat Regimental Team doing occupation duty. 2 years later, she dragged us back across the Pacific and then back to Kentucky, to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And I say my mom didn't have a nap. And she was quite the woman, and she was the wife of a spouse. And that was my introduction to the military. I grew up around the world. I eventually ended back up in Fayetteville, North Carolina for high school. Went off to Morgan State University, where I got a BA in political science, and I was commissioned as second lieutenant at that time. And I went on to grad school at the University of Missouri, and I spent 32 years on active duty as an infantry officer, and retired as the assistant chief of staff of 18th Airborne Corps out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, now Fort Liberty. I spent a number of years once I retired out of Afghanistan in 2003, working for the Battelle Memorial Institute as the chief of staff for Homeland Security sector out of Washington, D.C., so I got to see a large business. I left that after a couple of years and helped someone start up an 8A. And that's one of the things we'll probably talk about today. Did that for about 3 or 4 years and decided it was time for me to do it. So I started a small business back in 2010 and have grown that business over the past 13 years. We're service-disabled, veteran-owned, and we primarily focus in the IT cybersecurity sector, as well as in what I refer to as white-collar logistics, doing analytics and the material readiness for government agencies. So that's a little bit about me. Enrico?
Cool. Hey, great to be here. Great to see some people I haven't seen in a long time. My name is Enrique Oti. Way background, retired Air Force colonel, did 23 years in the wonderful Air Force, Air Force Academy grad. I'm not a contracts guy. I was a cyber officer, China Foreign Area officer. But I really kind of got into the contracts business when I helped stand up the Defense Innovation Unit. So I was one of the co-founders of DIUX. Back then there was an X on it, which were way cooler back then. And I ran the any DIUers in the room here? Yeah, one. Okay, there you go. So I ran the Air Force team for the first 3 years. And then in that process, DIU, a lot of it was like we joined in, we went through how do we change the relationship with the commercial sector, with Silicon Valley, and a lot of it was the acquisitions contracts piece. In the attempt to actually do contracts better, I was forced to actually learn all the other contract mechanisms and why they don't really work that great. So that was really good at introduction. And then I got to the pleasure of standing up and commanding an organization called Kessel Run, So the joy of Kessel Run being a software factory, we're using some of these same mechanisms that DIU used, but it was a program office. I ran a traditional program office. So I got to learn a little more about contracts and acquisitions, as all of my contracting officers will tell me, and Adam Furtado, who worked with me at Kessel Run, will tell me, I actually probably don't know anything about contracts. I was like, why don't we just buy that? And they're like, you can't do that, sir. I'm like, come on, just do it. And they're like, no, you can't. So anyway, I learned about that, what not to do. And now I'm the chief strategy officer at a cybersecurity startup. We're a B-round company. We work, we wouldn't call it dual use, but we have dual customer path. We have commercial customers, but we also have the government as a customer. And we actually have at this point, I believe, 5 government contracts. And so now in the last 3 years, we have really learned different contract vehicles, different ways of working with the government. So, happy to have this conversation, and hopefully I can impart a little bit of knowledge.
Thank you so much, Lou and Enrique. Really appreciate that, and thank you for your service as well. Both organizations are obviously veteran-run and led. So, and of course, you have your certain military service. And so, what has informed you guys from your military service into sort of transitioning into being a government contractor? What opportunities did you say, hey, you talked a little bit earlier, Enrique, like, hey, this is really kind of a bureaucratic, antiquated Byzantine system. So what opportunities did you see in gaps that you're able to fill on the contracting side? I'm going to start with Enrique, and then we'll go to Lou.
Yeah, so to learn about contracting. So when I was in the military, I was very much frustrated with DoD contracting. I'm like, this is horrific. Why is it so hard to be a buyer? I just want to work with the vendors. And it was only when I got to the outside that I realized it's even worse than I thought. It is, and I was shocked, because a lot of people are like, oh yeah, once you get out, you have your connections back on the inside. Those don't matter as much as I thought they would. Like, it is still a very laborious process, a very complicated process, and it's a very opaque process. But the advantage of having been on the inside first is, first of all, you've been abused for so many years, you kind of accept the abuse, and so it makes it easier. Like, I think I talked to some startups who did not come from the military, and they're trying to sell to the military. Like, they don't understand it, and I think it's like psychologically challenging for them. So I think, first of all, we understand the abuse and we're willing to put up with it. But the other part is, I think, when you come from inside the military, there is that advantage of knowing what the government's looking for, knowing the terms they like to hear, knowing the words they like to see on things, and it actually does make it a little easier to relate. And it is that relationship aspect, the ability to bond over certain things that you can actually help when actually contracting back with the government. Is like, you can speak in their language, they understand it, and it makes it a lot easier.
My experience tracks Enrico's as well. I was fortunate enough, as the more senior I became in the military. When I was a lieutenant captain, a major, or lieutenant colonel, I was popping caps. That's what I was doing. And but I was fortunate enough to go to the National War College. And what that did was it really introduced me to the military-industrial complex. And I found myself working in the Pentagon as assistant to the chairman. And I ended up also on the Army staff, the Army Secretariat. And what I got to see was the whole acquisition process. And that exposure puts you in a position that when you transition out of the military, you really bring something to the industry. And I'm speaking specifically of government contracting. Shomari used the term gap. What gap did I see? Well, for me, the gap that I saw was precisely that many of the DoD customers, whether it's the Title 10 services or it's the sinks or whatever the case may be, they have requirements, whether it is material or whether it is a service, whether it is augmenting their staffs. Their struggle is that if you are awarded a contract, they want someone who can identify with the culture. And I recognize that as a gap. So as I put my company together, I base my company, it's a knowledge-based company, my ability to go out and recruit veterans. And by recruiting veterans, what I do is I match them up with my customer base, my customer set, so that if I have folks that are taking care of computers, configuration, you name it, at whatever level it is, Generally, what you're going to get out of my company, Operations Services, Inc., is you're going to get a veteran who's providing you that service. And moreover, there's a likelihood that he or she is already served in your organization or on your staff. So that was the gap that I recognized in starting a service-focused company that I addressed.
Yeah, thank you, guys. That's very helpful. And from my sort of legal vantage point, that's certainly true. I've been in many conversations with clients who are non-government focused and trying to explain why there's a FAR clause about not texting while driving, or a TikTok ban. They're like, well, what is this? What is going on? Like, well, welcome to government contracts, where you could be a commercial contract that's like this much, and then a giant federal contract that's like so it's sort of overwhelming. So your point's well taken. And to that end, so it is a heavily regulated area. I also joke, the government contract is one of the few areas of law where your customer can arrest you, right? So you have to really kind of know the repercussions. So how do you sort of navigate that heavy regulation, but also identifying there's a market opportunity? And I'll start with Lou on that one. Enrique, you could pick up from there.
Well, it goes back to the fundamentals. And I would say to you that I'm a kind of a blocking, tackling kind of guy and try to keep things simple. When I started my company, I realized that if you'll just indulge me for a second, the approach that I took was that I recognized I was going to take the company through 3 stages. Now this panel is about starting a business, a startup. So I focused on a startup phase or stage, a growth stage, and a transition stage. And I put years to that as to what I expected to do. And that was very important because I wanted to know what I was going to do in the startup phase, which I think is the most critical phase. Now, you can get through the 2 or 3, 4 years in the startup phase as a small business government contracting company. You can survive it, you can win contracts, but if you haven't built the foundation in that startup phase, you're going to find yourself faking it. And you're going to find yourself struggling to deal with and cope with the complexity of the regulations and the laws that are attendant to being a government contractor. So I made sure, as part of the startup phase, I focused on the management piece, and that is hiring the right people and the folks that were experienced in the markets that I intended to take the company. So that just happened to be mostly retired senior military officers.
Yeah, I think, especially if you're a startup, you don't have time to deal with all the potential legal complexities that come around. So first of all, find a good law firm. That's number one. But beyond that, you've got to know what you're getting into. If you're bidding for contracts that are going to force you into like a cost accounting structure, you're going to kill your company before you even get off the ground. Because the cost of hiring the financial team to manage your cost accounting structure is going to be more than you're going to get on the contract. If you're going into a contract like you're doing an other transaction authority, and those can actually go to, or sorry, you're doing a CSO, those can go 2 ways. You can go towards an OTA or go towards a FAR Part 12. If you happen to go down the road of FAR Part 12 because you don't understand what's happening, you suddenly hit a point where you have a contract that cannot be renewed. And these are the kind of things that people don't think about at the time. And so what you have is a lot of small businesses who get advised to go bid on everything. Just go bid on, like if you're out there, you got to go bid on everything. No, don't do that. Because if you bid on everything, the worst thing that will happen is you will get a contract that either you can't perform on, destroys your business model, makes you undesirable to venture capital, or a million other things that could go wrong. And so part of this is you must be selective. There's a great expression I heard from somebody, probably on YouTube. I don't even know what it is. It's like, if it's not hell yes, then it's no. And it's the same thing when you're bidding on a contract. If you don't look at the contract and go, hell yes, that's exactly within our wheelhouse, and it's the kind of structure I want in a contract, then your answer should be no. Don't do the shotgun effect. And there are advisors out there that will tell you, do the shotgun effect, apply for everything. That's going to kill you. So just, you got to be focused. You got to know what you're getting into.
And the way to avoid that, or let me say, the way I avoided what Enrico just described was, if you'll just imagine this, I spent a year designing an operating company. I didn't put my company name to it or anything. I just worked for a year, researched, took the experience that I had with a large company, a billion-dollar company, and the experience that I had helping someone start up an 8A company, and mentors. And if you just imagine a quad chart, up in the left upper portion of the chart is the strategic piece. That's where I defined, the purpose, the why, what I wanted to do with the operating company. It had no name at that time. And then over into the right upper portion of the quadrant, I had how I was going to organize it to take it into the space that I had identified in the strategic vision. You drop down to the lower left of the quadrant, and you see organization. And you get into the organization piece, and that's where you start asking yourself, what types of contracts am I going to pursue? What types of contracts am I prepared to pursue? Do I have the capacity to go after the contracts? Do I have the structure that can ensure that I'm compliant? And then that other critical piece in the lower right is the financial piece, the accounting piece, the DCA piece, all of those things. I was at a social event in Washington a week ago. I met a young man who was in the 8A program, and we were talking. It was at a social event, and he was very excited. He had just won his first contract as an 8A firm. And as he talked, I asked the question. I said, well, let me ask you, was it a sole source or was it competitive? It was a sole source. And I said, well, how are things coming along? And he says, I got to hire people. I got to get this accounting piece squared away. And he started talking about all of the things that you want to have in place before you get the contract. And then I asked him, I said, how long have you been in business? And he said, 5 years. And I asked him, what have you been doing in 5 years? You've got to focus on the structure. Don't be the big dog that comes out from under the porch, catches the car, and doesn't know what to do with it. And it's key that you spend time on getting the structure right before you jump into government contracting.
That's great advice, Lou, and save.
Apologize, I don't mean to sound tutorial, but
lawyers charge a lot of money for that advice, so it's free. So you're getting a good bargain. So we've talked a little bit about 8A the 8A program. There's also, of course, service-disabled veteran-owned businesses. There's small business set-asides, women-owned business set-asides, Hub Zone as well. Enrique, I'm curious of your experience, both, particularly in government, actually, sort of what your experience is with sort of small businesses, where they go right, where there's value. If you were in those positions of buying, sort of like you trying to sort of push, but like what sort of impediments were there? And then Lou, on your side, Lou did mention he's a graduate at 8A as well as at SDVOSB. Or I think you mentioned you're at SDVOSB, but in the course of that, what made you a successful participant in the 8A program, and how you pivoted from that to graduating and of course being successful, post 8A? So, but Enrique first.
Yeah, so I'll be very honest. I don't have a lot of experience dealing with like the 8A program. I've dealt with it a bit, but not too much. But I think we took some use
small business generally. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk the set aside part of it first, though. There's a certain aspect of it where there are certain business models that lend you towards that type of contract mechanism. If you're a small startup and you're primarily offering services, yeah, that's probably the right way to go, and that's the way to get your foot in the door. Even as you're trying to think about potentially productization of whatever it is you do, 8A, if you're running a services side, is actually a pretty good way to get the foot in the door. We used that quite a few times at DIU because we needed access to stuff quickly, and 8A was the way that we could get access to local talent here in the area from the veteran community primarily and start delivering. But as you start looking at some other business models, if you're actually you're straight up going in as a SaaS company, you're going in as some kind of a technology provider, and you're trying to do a different kind of model, whether it's through licensing or something else. Oftentimes, the contract structures on those don't really lend themselves to that kind of scale of what you are trying to do and how you're trying to scale your company. And then you run into another issue as you start going with a small business. Again, it goes to raising venture capital. I know there's other VCs in the room that have talked about this. But once you start raising capital, you find out really quickly that you disqualify yourself. You might be a very small company. It might be all veterans. It doesn't matter. Once you start raising capital and the controlling interest is with the board, you suddenly lose that status. And you have companies that have not prepared, kind of like we talked about, like, have you prepared yourself? If you haven't prepared yourself with a good go-to-market strategy, good business development to compete for other methodologies of contracts, and you're kind of resting on your laurels of pushing towards these non-competed 8As, you're not prepped when you scale to actually compete for other types of contracts. And you actually see this. There's actually a huge transition from companies that are doing, like, there are companies out there that do 8A kind of contracts only, or there's companies that do SIPR contracts only, that do not prepare themselves from the structural perspective of their company's finances and their board and their legal status to actually compete for those larger contracts. And you kind of get stuck at that certain level of a company. And for some people, that's fine. Like, there are plenty of companies that, man, the type of values of some of these contracts, totally legit. You want to stay in that realm? Heck yeah, you can probably do that. But if you're looking to go big scale, you're looking to venture backed, you really got to contemplate how you started off of whether that's the right path for your scaling.
Yeah, it goes back to the framework that I shared with you a few minutes ago. If you go through that process, or some facsimile of that process as you're looking at starting up your small business, you're going to answer the question: do I want to get into the 8A program? Do I want to be a service-disabled, veteran-owned company? If you're a woman, do you want to be a woman-owned business through the SBA? And here's what happens. You really limit yourself in scaling initially. I'm out of the program now. You really limit your ability. The difficulty is there are so many rules that are imposed on you as an 8A firm. Let's just stick with an 8A firm. I was absolutely amazed at all of the reporting. And Enrique mentioned, boards. When you have an 8A certification, or you have a service-disabled veteran certification, one of the key things in the contracting business that contracting officers and your competitors pay close attention to is your firm being led, managed, maneuvered in any way by someone other than the 8A owner or the service-disabled veteran. And that's one of the quickest ways to get yourself in trouble. So again, you got to go through a process if you're starting up a small business to ask yourself, is that what I want to do? And if I am going to do it during the embryonic phases of my company, recognize there are going to be limitations imposed. So I think that's a key thing. And the way you prevent getting caught up in the pickle there, is that you know it before you step into it. When I graduated from the 8A program a year ago, we almost popped champagne because all of the reporting to the SBA was over. And you almost have to have a staff to do all of that reporting. And just one other thought on that. The service-disabled veteran set aside to get that certification, rightfully the government protects the integrity of the program. They don't want front companies. They want veterans. And you will get checked out periodically to make sure that you're not being unduly influenced by someone trying to control the company. And that includes the structure of the board. So just keep that in mind as you start a business up.
That's great advice, and as a lawyer, compliance is this sings to my heart. So yeah, we're big into that. But I don't want to make it too regulatory heavy. So what strategies do you find? There's a lot of money. People hear small business, and I should say that the federal government directs 23% of all federal dollars to small business. And so we think small, but there's literally hundreds of billions of dollars here, and some companies, like you all mentioned, actually prefer to be small. But if there's a size standard that says if we stay with below 500 employees, they can still get billions of dollars. Every couple of years, there's a story in the Washington Post about a particular contractor I won't name, but they're doing quite well, but they're still small. And the Washington Post is like, how can this be? They're small, but they're worth billions of dollars. Well, that's welcome to small business contracting. So it really depends, like you said, on what sort of model you want to go after. You want to take the VC money? Do you want to become affiliated and risk losing small business status? Or you just want to sort of stay in your sort of sweet spot? But in terms of business capture, so let's talk about this sort of to the entrepreneurs of the room. What strategies do you all find as successful? So notwithstanding the compliance and regulations, Enrique, what's sort of like a good strategy for business capture, and how do you all sort of track opportunities and sort of go after that?
Alcohol. So, all right, let's.
Good bourbon.
Yeah, so let's look at business capture. So we always we complain about the government. Oh my God, it's a bureaucracy, regulation, whatever. But at the other end of those regulations, at the other end of the table, at the other end of that email is a person. The best way to do business capture with the government is get to know your government customer. Go to the places where they go. I don't mean stalk them, but what I mean is like go to the type of events that your government customer is going to be at. Go hang out at the conference happy hours at AFA, AUSA, whatever those are. Get to know your customer, and it's get to know the full range of your customer. Part of it's the user. You always want to know your user because you always want to know what you're delivering. You need your user super excited about you. So that's the first one. Your user has to be excited about it. If they don't want what you're selling, then what's the point? But beyond the user, you also have to have the support of the leadership, the stakeholders. So again, those generals aren't going to get you a contract, but they can probably not get you a contract. And so you need to know the user. You need to know who their bosses are, who actually will say, yeah, we should really do this, or say, not my priority, let's do something else. But then you should also know who are the program managers. These are the people who are going to manage your relationship. Who are the contracting officers? They're the ones who you actually probably want to talk to about what are the options for contracts. So a lot of contracting officers, they have their way of doing business. They always do a FAR Part 15, or they always do a FAR 12 for software. Whatever it is, they have their methodology. But you know what, if you talk to them and say, look, our business model doesn't quite fit that, what other options are there for contracts? You can have those conversations, you can learn what's out there, but you can also influence them a bit. So at the end of the day, for business development inside the federal government, especially in the DoD, which I know best, it is relationship driven. Yes, there are RFIs and RFPs, and yes, you can spend your entire life submitting for those, and you might get lucky. But a better methodology, I say, is just get to know the people. Get out of your office, get out from behind your email, go hang out, grab some lunch, have a drink. Don't pay for any of it, because that's illegal. And on the other side, they should know that too. But hang out, get to know the people. That's actually your best way in.
I found as a startup, and I'm no longer a startup, but I found that a strategy that worked well was I had relationships with larger companies based on things that I had done in the past, whether it was Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Tell Memorial Institute, you name it, I had relationships. Based on those relationships, I was able to work with those large companies who brought me onto their existing contracts. And from those existing contracts, I was able to develop relationships with the government customer. And I don't mean to insult anyone, but when you start talking about relationships in government contracting, make sure you make the distinction between the requirements, the customer, and the contracting officer. Okay, that's an important distinction because, quite frankly, you can't have a relationship with a contracting officer or contracting specialist and not potentially get on a slippery slope. So, that's my advice to you. With contracting agencies, contracting officers, and contracting specialists, make them aware of who you are, what you're capable of, and they want to hear that. But the key is the requirements folks, the folks that do the work in the government that need your product or need your service. And by developing a relationship with them, they're able to make a case for you with their contracting agency or their representative. And if you do have, for example, an 8A, you potentially can have that sole sourced to you. I did that, but they were only for contracts that were like $4.4 million. I think that's the threshold now. But you keep doing that. $4.4 million added to another $4.4 million, added to another $4 million, and so on and so on. That starts to make a difference. But the key thing is it starts to expand your tentacles within your market space, that you are delivering your services and that you are delivering or your product. So I think that's key. Make the distinction between contracting agencies and relationships and the government customer.
Can I add something here? You brought up a great point with working with the big companies. So my perspective of this has changed drastically from when I was on active duty and trying to do the contracting versus now being on the other side and trying to get the contracts. When I was on active duty, I was like, why do I have to go through the big contractors? Why do I have to go through Carasoft? Why can't I just buy stuff? And on the government side, I'm like, this is frustrating. Now I'm on the other side, I realize why it works. It's actually more efficient. If you're a small business, it's actually more efficient and more effective for you to sometimes work through these other entities. You have to be careful sometimes, but there's a few ways to do this. So number one, if you're selling software, you're selling a product, something like Carasoft is a fantastic vehicle if you're a small business to get yourself purchasable by the government in a quick and easy manner. So I highly recommend it. Look into it. I'm sure there's other people other than Carasoft. That's just the one we work with, so that's one I know. This is not an advertisement, just talking.
Hey, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but then the other one is the big primes. When the government does programs through the primes themselves have requirements to do non-traditional partnering. It doesn't always mean small business, but there's non-traditional partnering requirements. So if you're trying to get into the government, you can actually work through these big primes, and you get a subcontractor relationship. This does a couple things for you. Number one, it allows you to annotate that you've performed on a government contract when you go for other government contracts. That's usually a question on there is like, have you done any performance on this type of thing, or have you done any past performance? If you're a sub, you can say, yeah, I've done some performance. The other part of it, though, is you can actually start the paperwork for the stuff that you're going to need if you eventually want to be a prime contractor. Security clearances for your teams. Facility clearances for you as a company to be registered to be able to hold security clearances. Some of the other accounting paperwork that you need with the government, some of the compliance stuff, the NIST frameworks, 800-171, CMMC if that ever comes out properly. So there are things that when you're on a sub, you can actually start going down that route, getting your products accredited in the government. And so sometimes that subcontract relationship with a big prime, when you're first starting out, allows you, under the government's dollars, to take care of all that work that you're going to have to do anyway when you eventually want to be a prime on a contract.
That is so key. Also mentioned there a second ago was facility clearance. My company's had a top secret facility clearance since it was incorporated almost, and that was a result of me doing work with Lockheed Martin. What I would tell you is if you're small and you have a facility clearance, that narrows the competition down. That is a key. You want that feather in your hat, a facility clearance, so that your competitors are eliminated. You don't have as many small businesses that you're competing with as soon as the government declares that something's classified. In fact, I generally am working anywhere from about 10 to 12 contracts in my company. And of those 10 to 12, about 10 of them right now are actually classified. It's classified work.
You guys make a great point about the value of going to the folks who are actually putting out the RFPs. I have every so often some clients come in, they say, well, we're working the Hill pretty hard for contracts, and say that's the worst place to go for federal work. You're wasting your dollars and your time. You want to go to the contracting officer somewhere deep in some basement of Fort Belvoir or wherever else, and that's really where. And if they get a call from the Hill, they're going to be scared. They don't want that. I also came from the National 8A Conference in Atlanta on the way here, and I think there's a bunch of other organizations like that, but they had a bunch of different federal agencies who were looking for contractors there. And so to the extent that you're interested in, again, being a contractor, I'd encourage you to go to those trade associations and really meet those.
Shomari, you mentioned strategies, in the business. You also need to pay attention to contract vehicles. That's got to get those early on, whether it's Polaris. I could just go on Polaris, Oasis.
Stars 3.
Yeah, it just goes on and on and on.
That's soup.
And what happens is, if you work that and you work with larger companies, the longer you're around, what you're going to discover is you have the ability, the capability to perform the work to compete on a solicitation that comes out. But what you discover is it comes out on a contract vehicle. And if you don't hold the contract vehicle, you can't compete on the work. So in terms of a strategy, you need to look at those mass contracts that come out from the government, the IDIQs, and all of those, and you start building those as certifications and contract vehicles that you have. And what that does is it allows you then to really start scaling things.
I'll kind of twist one of the things you said. You said about some things only come out on the contract vehicles. I kind of view it the other way around. If you're a small business and you're out doing your business development, you're at again, I'll go AFA as an example. You're one of the 1,000 booths there. People are walking by. They like your technology, and they're like, "Well, how do we get to you?" Mm-hmm. Being able to tell them that you're on a contract vehicle makes life easy for them.
Absolutely.
Because now they know how to get to you. And again, it's not a sole source. Let's look this way. It's
not a sole source.
Not a sole source. But they're asking for basically what you have, and the only people that compete for that are other people on that contract vehicle. And if there's other people that don't do what you do, then you got a really high chance of getting it.
You do.
And so what you need to do in so much, like people in the government, you guys all know this, most of you came out of the military or the government, you're busy. You have a lot of emails a day, most of them go unread. Anything that makes your life easier is good. And so if you talk to your potential user and your user can go to the contracts office and say, I found this awesome piece of software, and guess what? It's on a GSA schedule. We can just buy it. Then contract officer's like, yeah, I'll do that one. If they have to do some whole new solicitation, it's going to take them a year and a half. It's not going to happen. So,
again, great advice, great insight. So we talked a bit about sort of the strategies of business capture. Just as we sort of wrap this up, curious about your thoughts about just once you actually get the work, right? So Lou alluded to once you sort of the dog's chasing the car, once you sort of catch it, what maybe your first few contracts, what lessons did you learn? What were some of the successes, challenges, and again, as you sort of grow, sort of hit from that startup phase to the maturation phase, what sort of the challenges are there that maybe this audience could learn from? And maybe Lou start off, and then we'll go to Enrique.
Go ahead. The challenges that I encounter have a lot to do, as you win contracts and they start getting more complicated, that starts defining more what your staff looks like, and also what your potential employees look like. What pool do you have? And one of the things that I've discovered is the bigger the contract, the more complex, the more complicated the recruiting process is to meet the demand. Everybody doesn't live in the Silicon Valley. Where I come from, and as a veteran performing contracts, my biggest challenge has been where I am finding qualified individuals to perform the complex contracts that we win. I'm fortunate enough that I'm located right outside of Fort Liberty. And there are a significant number of young men and women who've determined, they're finished with the military. Some are in this room now. And that's where my talent pool is. And that's one of the key things and one of the biggest challenges that I have. And recruiting is big. Once you start winning and once you start building that workforce, recruiting becomes very critical. And you've got to have a good compensation plan to hold on to folks, especially when you start getting in that IT cybersecurity sector, because those folks don't let grass grow under their feet. And you get a contract, it's going to last for 5 years, and you've got to pay attention to turnover. But my challenge has been has been recruiting. Successful, have never had issues with turnover, but it's something you've really got to pay close attention to.
Yeah, a couple things. So the first one, as you're developing your contract with the government, don't be scared to talk to the government. There might be government contract officers who will be scared to talk to you. The ones who've been around longer, the ones that are more mature, the ones that really know the rules will actually be more open to conversations with you, which is fantastic, because that's actually how it should be. It's not supposed to be adversarial. There's supposed to be a bit of a collaborative relationship when you're contracting. As you're writing your contracts, put a lot of optionality into your contract. Going with like one big sale of something, even us as a product company, it's not like we sell, here's the product. You actually can sell it in components, you can sell it with services attached, you can sell it with milestones, and you can actually put a lot of CLINs in there, because what you want to do is you need to give the government flexibility as the situation changes. Maybe the mission changes. Maybe your program manager, PCS, is to another job, and you get a whole new program manager who wants to go a different way. If you don't have the optionality in your contract to be flexible to meet the needs of the government, not just now, but 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, then they're going to find somebody else, or they're just going to like stop buying your stuff. And so a lot of it is you need to actually make sure that you work with the government, make sure that you are providing value down the road, and you can do that through a lot of contract options. You have to be able to deliver, of course, deliver a good product. Reputation matters. Especially if you're delivering to small communities, like anyone selling to special operations or other places. Reputation matters. If you mess it up early, you can probably kiss your business goodbye. The other one is cybersecurity, and part of it I say this because I'm a cybersecurity officer for many years, part of it's because I'm now in a cybersecurity company. If you are insecure, and there is a problem with what you have sold to the government, or the way your company manages its own IT and your own company gets pwned by an adversary or even by some random kid in a basement, it's going to hurt. And if, first of all, your reputation's gone, you actually have legal problems if you actually weren't following all the right rules, if you weren't doing your NIST compliance, you weren't doing your CMMC stuff, 800-53. So if you don't have the documentation in place, now you're actually at legal risk if you actually lost government data. And so before you step into a government contract, especially if you're working classified work, make sure your cybersecurity house is in order. Again, we're here, a lot of us here for the mission. We care about national security, we care about the mission. If you have a cybersecurity incident, that is government data that is now out for anyone to see.
I couldn't agree more. In terms of just contract administration and making sure you talk about reputational importance, CPARs are something as well. So once to the extent that those are basically contract report cards, and once the KO will give a review, and sometimes there are many different complicating factors. So I always encourage clients to make sure you have that input. One, the CPARs, it could be a lot to the story that aren't there, and there's a number of personalities and challenges there, but make sure you keep that CPAR score up when you're up for recompete or something else. Yep. Lou, I know you have some more stories for that one. And we're closing now. We have a few minutes left.
I've got some stories, but the conversation here has caused me to just want to share one thing with regard to how you look at your company and who's on the staff and what have you. You've got to get a FAR expert on your staff, or someone that you can rely on who really understands the FAR. And this is why this is important. When you take on a solicitation and you're looking at preparing a proposal to respond to a request for proposal, believe me, there are contracting officers who release solicitations that quite frankly aren't compliant. The solicitation is not compliant. Yeah, it is one of the biggest copy-paste drills I've ever seen. And what happens is, if you don't have that expertise in your startup, your small business, you really aren't sure about what you're responding to. And so I really encourage you, if you're starting a business up, a small business, government contracting, you either have to have that internal to you, or you've got to find someone who can do it for you and outsource it. so that you make sure that you understand what you're reading and you make sure that you understand what you are responding to. I think that's a critical piece. You got to get a grip on the federal acquisition regulation. You just can't overlook it. And it's something that it's complicated, and you need that expertise.
All right, thanks, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. We have about 10 minutes left, so if you could open up the floor to some questions. And the FAR is a great way to put your kids to sleep at night, by the way, if you're looking at young kids. I have a young one.
Yeah.
See someone back there, and then we'll take.
Hey, good afternoon. Ben Solsby. I'm a program manager at Air Force Research Lab and also a Defense Ventures fellow with Mark Ventures. So I'm going to put my government hat on real quick. And I like everything you're saying about aligning small businesses up, being on GSA schedule, and making it easy. I'll say from the government side, I think the people in this room probably agree. Most of your customers, you're limited by the color money they have. Like, I've got O&M money. I really wish I could just get some procurement dollars to buy that thing. Or, we're an R&D organization, sorry, plenty of R&D money. We can't really procure anything, and we certainly can't maintain it. So it's like, on our side, we've got to find these creative relationships to collaborate to get to simple, small contracts. Even on something as simple as a siever, right? Like, less than $2 million, you have to get really creative. So how do we, as, say, somebody at a research lab that has access to all of these warfighters with active problems, how do we come together to, leverage the capability of the labs and end users to get to the small businesses that have those solutions we so desperately need?
Ooh, yeah, I love this one. Good question. So there's a couple things. First of all, say hi to Jake. Yeah, good dude. If you want to get a small business, a couple ways to do it. Number one, the CRADA program, I think was one of the greatest programs in the Department of Defense. So cooperative research and development agreements. Under a CRADA, no money's allowed to change hands, but you can provide equal services or value from both the government and the private sector. So it allows you as a small business to do research hand in hand with a government organization. AFRL does have CRADA authorities, where our company's under CRADA with the Navy for a project as well. What that means as a small business, it allows you to work with the government, get access to government people, get access to some government furnished equipment, and more importantly, you learn government personas. You learn about the engineers, you learn about your potential users, you meet the program managers, and you can actually, in many ways, use your knowledge from a CRADA to then try to transition and compete for contracts. So if AFRL or the government wants to work with small business, make the CRADA process faster, do more CRADAs, and that actually allows, there's plenty of people that want to work for you for free, and they would. Just make that one happen. The other one, stop with FAR Part 12 contracts. Anyway, the lack of following is really frustrating. Push towards OTAs. If the government really wanted to get a technology well, it'd go commercial solutions opening towards an OT, which then transitions into production OT. This methodology has been around for decades. It's been authorized by Congress and reauthorized multiple times. It's been advocated for by ATNL, what it was OTNL, R&E, and ANS. And it has been implemented hundreds and hundreds of times by people like DIU, by CyberWorks, by others. If you are here in the government and your contracting officer is not willing to do an OTA, you need to talk to them and ask them why not, and push them towards that. That is the best way for the government to work with small businesses, because it actually allows an in-person negotiation on all the terms of the contract. And then after the prototype is executed, you can actually completely change all the terms for the production, because you use the prototype to learn what's the best way to work with that small business in production. And so it is not just experimentation with technology, it's experimentation with processes and relationships. And so I would say if AFRL wants to get the job done, CRADAs and OTs, a bunch of them, do them fast, less than 60 days. And that's your best way to get to small business. And it's the best way that small business gets to work with the government and scale.
Question? Well,
How did you establish your relationship with Carousel? Can you talk about their strategy and introduction into those larger companies?
I think our CEO just knew their CEO, and I think that's how it started. But no, generally you can just kind of reach out. Like, they're everywhere. You go to any trade show, find the Carousel booth, and say, hi, how do I be one of your vendors that do the resell for you? And they'll have those conversations. And again, not every company's a fit. They have certain things they're looking for. But I think you just kind of find someone there, and it's a massive company. And does anybody know an alternative to Carousel? I know there are some.
There's Red River, I believe.
River?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Technology, maybe another one.
Just I don't want to advocate for one company.
Yeah. Just persistence, really, I've found is the way to do it. Sir?
I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about OTAs, like where does the funding come from? Does that have to be kind of requested in advance of the fiscal year? How does a small business transition from like a phase 2 to phase 3 utilizing an OTA?
So you're mixing two different things here. So if you're talking about a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, that's the SBIR methodology. And I do like SBIRs, by the way. Those work as well. I assume most of you know what SBIRs are. A mistake that a lot of startups make, or small companies make, is they try to go direct for phase 2. They get excited by that $1.5 million, whatever that cap is. Not necessary. You can do a SBIR phase 1. The reason is a SBIR phase 1 is grounds for a sole source contract as a follow-on. So you can actually go directly from a phase 1, you get your 75K, yeah, not a lot of money, but if your user likes you, they can actually then go directly to a phase 3, stick you up on an IDIQ or some other kind of contract in the phase 3. And that is like, that SBIR phase 1 is your foot in the door to do a lot more things with a lot more customers. So the SBIR process is good, and I highly recommend it, but if you just keep going for SBIR phase 2s, it's very competitive, and it's not exactly necessary. The OTs are something different. An OT is another transaction authority, usually executed what's called through a commercial solutions opening, which is a CSO, is an acquisitions methodology, which can drive towards an OT. But the OT itself, you start off with a prototype OT. Small contract for you to prototype. But once that's successful, you get a letter of success. That letter of success allows anyone in the department to then execute a production OT, which is a full-scale production contract, off of that prototype OT. Now again, a really good contracting officer, what they realize, and DA, you can correct me if I'm wrong since they're in the room, OTs do not fall under the DFAR. So you can actually do a more business style contractual relationship. You can actually negotiate that out. You put commercial pricing terms in there. So there's a lot more flexibility on the OT. But again, the success memo from a prototype OT allows any contracts officer to issue a production OT. But again, this is where, if you're in the government here, if your contracts officers are not familiar with OTs, they've got to learn them because that's the best way to get to small businesses.